All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here. And so for tonight's seminar, we are going to talk about building balanced meals. So this will be our first of four mini nutrition seminars. We're going to talk about 4 simple steps to build balanced meals. So as we get started, I want you to think about your snacks and your meals. And then at the end, I'm going to ask you how well you're doing with balancing your snacks meals. You guys are all doing the challenge, so we should be good with that. And for people that are not on right now, we think about our balanced meals, just simply going to think about a protein, a carbohydrate, and a fat. So we'll get a little bit more into that as we go. So keeping our meals balanced with a source of protein, a source of carbohydrate, and a source of fat is really important for us to feel satisfied. It's also going to help us sustain energy, and it's going to keep us a little bit more full for a little bit longer. Not only do they provide us with energy, but they're also going to help us with muscle growth, recovery, and other important metabolic functions. So understanding how to build balanced meals with the appropriate portion sizes will really help us establish a foundation for good health and good nutrition habits moving forward. So our first step is going to be to pick your protein. Protein is going to provide us with important amino acids, which are essential for us to build muscle. And it also is going to help with recovery. So when we do a tough workout in the gym or feeling really fatigued afterwards, we want to make sure that we're getting in some protein right after. That's going to help immediately start that recovery process, and it's going to help our muscles grow at the same time. So it's going to help us also stay full and feel more satisfied during our meals and snacks. When it comes to protein sources, we want to focus on our lean proteins with our meals, such as chicken breast, turkey, egg whites, fish. We do want to be careful for our higher fat protein sources. So think about some of our red meats, maybe chicken wings, chicken thighs are going to be a little bit higher in fat content. On average, protein is going to give us about 4 calories per gram. And we want to try to shoot for around 30% of your total calories for the day is going to be made up of protein. So here is the protein section of our food options guide. And we want to notice that the foods in the green column are going to have a lower fat content. So we want to primarily choose items from the green column when we're picking our proteins for our meals. Not to say that you can't have anything from the yellow or the red, but primarily we want to try to stick with the green. Step number 2 is going to be to choose your carbohydrate. So carbohydrates, I think like we've talked about, usually get a bad reputation. We say we're carbo loading or trying to avoid carbs. A lot of different foods are going to fit into that carbohydrate category. Some of them are good, some of them are not as good. So we have fruits, we have sugar, we have bread, pasta, grains, and even our starchy vegetables such as sweet potato or some squashes are going to be considered starchy carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are going to break down into glucose, which is what our body is going to use as fuel. So we need carbohydrates every day to make sure that we're fueling our brain. Like protein, carbohydrate is going to provide us around 4 calories per gram and should make up somewhere around 30 to 40% of your daily calories. So our carbohydrates are going to fall into 2 different categories. The first one's going to be our starchy carbohydrates, and the second one is going to be our non-starchy carbohydrates, or what we call our volume carbs. It's really important to understand the difference between these two when we are building our balanced meals. Both of them are going to be really important to include in your daily nutrition. Starchy carbs, however, are going to pack a little bit higher calorie content and should be eaten in smaller portions. Whereas our volume carbohydrates are going to have just a little bit of calories, but a ton of nutrients. So you can eat a large serving of our volume carbs and it won't be a lot of calories, but it's still going to make you feel full. So it's going to fill you up. These are going to be the first things that we're going to eat more of if you're still feeling hungry after you've eaten your meals, or if you're sticking with your balanced diet. If you're still feeling hungry throughout the day, I would suggest you add in more volume carbohydrates. Again, because they're going to make you feel full, they're going to fill you up, and they're also not a lot of calories. So you can add quite a bit of volume carbs in. Our step number 3 is going to be to add in some healthy fats. So I think we've talked about this. Eating fat is not going to make you fat, right? Don't avoid fats because it just says fat. Fat is actually going to, again, help you stay full longer, and it's also going to help us absorb important fat-soluble vitamins. So we need fat in our diet to help with that. Keep in mind that fat is the more calorie-dense macronutrient, and that's going to give us 9 calories per gram compared to the 4 for our carbohydrates and protein. So we want to remember that a little bit of fat is going to go a long way. And we also want to stick with more plant-based sources of fat, such as our avocado or olive oil. And we want to try to shoot for our fat content to be around 30 to 40%. Keep in mind that when we're building our meals and snacks, it's going to vary, again, based on how much fat is already in your protein source. So if we're eating a higher fat protein, we're not going to want to add in a lot of extra fat in that meal as well, because that's already accounted for in our protein source. So here are some examples of some healthy fat sources from our food options guide. You'll notice quite a few different types of nuts. Small portions of nuts are going to be a great addition to your snacks for your fat serving. If you're trying to look for a little bit of more fat with your snacks, even with your meals, if you want to add in some cashews or something like that, that'll give us some healthy fats as well. All right, so step number 4, we're going to talk about portioning your plate. So before I get into talking about how to portion your plate for lunch and dinner using our plate method, I want to talk a little bit about breakfast, because I feel like that's where people kind of get a little off track with the plate method. Most of our more convenient breakfast options that most of us choose are going to be a little bit higher in carbohydrates and not going to have a ton of protein. So when figuring out what we're going to eat for breakfast, the first thing that we want to look at is what source of protein am I going to have for this meal. For breakfast, you might consider having eggs. Eggs are going to be a great source of protein. We also want to remember that they do contain a little bit of fat as well. So since we already have a protein and a fat in our eggs, we would just need to add in some carbohydrates. So I would recommend adding to your eggs some non-starchy vegetables. You can create a little egg scramble. You can even add egg whites into that as well if you're looking to add a little bit more protein in with your breakfast. And then you can add some fruit with that to get in some carbohydrates with your eggs as well. So we're still sticking with a balanced meal for breakfast, but it's not going to be super carb heavy like if we were having some sort of bread or cereal or something like that. So the plate method is what we recommend to set up your plate. This is going to be the easiest and most effective way to improve your diet, because it's going to help you create more balanced meals and focus on eating high quality foods. This is going to be a great rule of thumb when you're eating out or ordering food to go. It's also going to help when you're cooking at home to help you set up your plate. So for lunch, we think about half of our plate is going to be our non-starchy vegetable. That's going to be more of our greens. You can go back to your food options guide for that, our volume carbs. We can eat a ton of those, right? A quarter of our plate is going to be our lean protein. A quarter of our plate is going to be our starchy carb. And then we're going to add in our plant-based fat. So if you're cooking with oil, you want to take that into account as well, because that is going to be your source of fat, okay? At dinner, it's going to look pretty much the same. There's a couple options here. If you want to repeat the lunch example for dinner, you're welcome to do that. Right now, we're kind of focusing on a little bit lower carb, maybe a little bit higher fat, just based on activity level, since most of us are at home, maybe not doing as much or working out as intensely. But for dinner, if you wanted to add in more vegetables, we can restructure our plate and get in 3/4 of our plate is going to be our non-starchy vegetable, and then a quarter of our plate again is going to still be our lean protein. So we're basically just removing that starchy carbohydrate from our dinners. A couple of tips to help you eat your plate. One thing that you can try is eating your non-starchy vegetables first. So this way you're definitely getting in a lot of food. It's a lot of nutrient-dense food. It's going to help fill you up a little bit more. Then we're going to eat our protein, and then we're going to eat our starch. So we're at least making sure we're getting in all those good vegetables to begin with. If you get full throughout their meal, and then you don't have room for all of your starch at the end of the meal, that's fine. That's great. If you're still hungry again after you finish your plate, go back for the non-starchy vegetables. So if you have more of those volume carbs, you can add those in at the end of your meal as well. I would recommend waiting about 15 minutes after you finish a meal, just so that your mind catches up to your body and you can register if you're actually still hungry or not. Okay, so it's going to take about 15 minutes for that. So when you're going out to eat, you can still stick with the plate method. So let's say I'm ordering a burger and fries, right? So I can order my burger without the bun. I can add in an extra side of vegetables. I can switch out my French fries for sweet potato fries, or I can switch it out altogether for an extra serving of vegetables. So if you're going out to eat or you're doing something social where you're eating out with someone else, you can still try to stick with that plate method. Just take a look at the menu in advance and then see how you can set up your plate based on what they have for options. When you're planning your meals at home, you can use the food options guide. So the green, yellow, and red categories of protein, carbohydrate, and fats. So when we're planning our meals at home, we're going to choose our protein, we're going to choose our starchy carbohydrate, and we're going to choose some non-starchy vegetables as well, just to help us create a little bit more of a balanced meal. So to wrap up, remember, to build your balanced meal, we're simply going to focus on 1, picking your protein, 2, choosing your carbohydrate, 3, adding in your healthy fat, and then making sure, number 4, that we're portioning our plate with the plate method. With practice, making balanced meals should become second nature, so you won't have to think about it as much. I challenge you guys to follow the plate method whenever you're building your meals and snacks to help you stay on track with your nutrition goals. Thank you for joining me today. This is the 4 simple steps for building balanced meals mini nutrition seminar. This will be our first of 4. And we'll meet again next Tuesday night at 7 o'clock to talk about our next topic.